Hello. Hello, police. Yeah, what's the problem, sir? We just drove down our farm track. Yeah. Go and feed our pheasants. We come across a Range Rover with 3 people in it. Yeah. It appears that they're dead. I don't know what's happening. Blood in the motor all over them.
And welcome back to a new video on the Essex Boys case. As always, if you are enjoying the content, please do give the video a thumbs up. And if you're interested in the Essex Boys case, or simply true crime in general, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. And in this video, we're going to be taking a look at some of the trial points for the cross-examination in court of Darren Nichols. This will give us a good idea of what the barrister's plan of attack was when questioning Darren Nichols, and some of the things that he's written down which he found personally odd. Later on, we're also going to talk about the relationship between Darren Nichols and the corrupt police officer. So let's start from the very beginning with some of the trial points which were used by the barrister to cross-examine Darren Nichols. So firstly, let's start with quite an interesting piece that the barrister's written down here in the trial points. And it's actually something I've made quite a few videos on. He actually starts talking about what the plan was that evening to kill Tucker Tatum Rolfe. Because we were told originally that when Michael Steele got to the bottom of the lane, he was surprised by the gate being locked. Supposedly the Range Rover was to continue into the field beyond the gate, where they would later be executed. And I always found that quite odd, because it would make the situation a lot more dangerous for whoever killed them. And really it would make the job of killing 3 men in a large open field a lot more difficult than if the gate was actually locked, if that makes sense. And what he's actually written down here is quite interesting. The barrister's written down, there's an old saying, a murderer always returns to the scene of the crime. Has Nichols been subject to observation at the murder scene, which brings him initially into the frame? Now, I guess what they're trying to say here is, was Darren Nichols monitored, or was he under some sort of surveillance where he was seen near the crime scene or reattending the crime scene after this crime had taken place? Now, this is something I'm going to go into more detail later on in the video. I did actually plan to speak about this towards the end. But what we know is that Darren Nichols was under surveillance from January 1996. And that just so happens to be when he comes into contact with the corrupt officer, DC Jim. Now, just to clarify something I've just said, which is actually incorrect, there isn't any evidence to say that Darren Nichols was under surveillance in January 1996. But what leads that to be an extremely strong possibility is that the phone records and all of the transcripts and all of the sort of putting the dots together, if you like, regarding this triple murder starts in January 1996. This is when Darren Nichols is calling the corrupt officer. This is when those tapes are recorded. So you have to believe that Darren Nichols' name has come up in January 1996, and his name will have been put forward as a strong suspect for the triple murders. So I guess this is what the barrister is saying here. Was Darren Nichols under some sort of surveillance, and did he return to the scene of the crime? It is also worth remembering that when the police put the pieces of the puzzle together and they see Darren Nichols' telephone number, they see who's been in contact with who, Darren Nichols, Michael Steele and Jack Womes. If the police didn't have any sort of background or any idea who Darren Nichols was originally, for all they knew, he could have been a hitman. So they would have taken him extremely seriously. They would have seen his name popping up. They would have seen his contact with DC Jim, who was also under investigation for being a corrupt police officer. Now, there's no way they would have taken Darren Nichols lightly when his name and all of this circumstantial evidence, such as the phone records, came to light. He would have been a prime suspect, hence the reason he was actually charged with murder during his first police interview. Now, to put this in the most basic term possible, when Darren Nichols came to the attention of the police, when they realised that he was in touch with Michael Steele, Jack Womes, he was in the area when the murders took place, the important thing to remember is that they didn't know in what capacity his involvement was, other than being in the area at the time of the murders and connected to both Steele and Womes. So for all that they knew, he could have been a hitman, he could have been someone who was completely off of their radar, unless they knew half the story of who this person was and who he was actually involved with, i.e. DC Jim. So the fact that Darren Nichols does come across as, you know, a driver, a gopher, whatever you want to call it, when his name come to the attention of the police, they would have taken it extremely seriously, at least to start with. Now, the barrister then goes on to almost give his own sort of theory, or a different theory, on the murders themselves. When talking about Darren Nichols, he has written down here the following. The idea, he tells us, is to get them into the field, out of the lane. Where then is the assassin likely to conceal himself? Or was the assassin in the vehicle, perhaps with one man dead already, intent on dumping the body into a lake, then surprise the other two when arriving at the gate? We must not forget where the spent cartridges are found. You will of course notice Nichols claims the gate is locked in the interview. He never mentions chained or padlocked. Now, we were told, or we have been told for quite some time, that Darren Nichols' sort of conversation with Michael Steele went along the lines of Michael Steele saying to him, well, we got down the lane, you know, I didn't know what we were going to do, the gate was locked, I thought the gate was going to be open, I had no idea where Jack was, and then Jack just appeared from the bushes and started shooting him. Now, the barristers picked up on this here, the fact that if they had have driven past the gate into that open field, where was the gunman going to be hiding? You know, that's completely crazy. I can't imagine Michael Steele and Darren Nichols ever had this conversation. Now, has Darren Nichols seen the news coverage? Has he seen the gate which was shut? And is Darren Nichols kind of imparting his own truth into the story here, trying to add credibility to what he is actually saying? The barrister uses a good line, right? I'm not sure if I can remember it word for word, but he says that Darren Nichols basically blends fact with fiction. He will tell you a little piece of factual information and then a lot of fictional information in order to try and add credence and credibility to whatever he is saying. The barrister then goes on to write the following. If the alleged cocaine deal was just a ploy, what would be the purpose of assessing whether an aircraft could land in this field? Nichols' lack of aviation knowledge unmasks him as a fraud. A pilot would glean little satisfaction out of flying over a site to assess suitability for landing, except in an emergency, if it were possible. The site would have to be physically inspected. It could well be a bog for all you could tell from a closed cockpit. Nichols does not describe a pilot's attitude or view, merely a non-aviator's fabrication. So really what the barrister is saying here, what he is picking up on, is the fact that by driving down that lane, you're not going to actually gain any information on where a plane, could land. We know that those fields, although they appear quite large to the naked eye, they aren't anywhere near large enough to be able to land a light aircraft, let alone take off again. So what would be the purpose of travelling down there to look at a supposed airstrip which doesn't even exist, or a field which isn't even anywhere near big enough to accommodate a light aircraft? The barrister, what he is saying here in as many words is, what would the point be in travelling down that lane in the pitch black without any torches, without any sort of real clothing enable them to sort of go into those fields and have a real good look around? You know, it really didn't serve any purpose at all to be there that evening. The barrister has then written the following, which is quite interesting as it does give a discrepancy between two versions of events, or two versions of the story, shall we say. He has written down here the following. Nichols claims that the bait is 5 kilos of cocaine compared to with Donna Jagger's statement of 30 kilos of cocaine. So obviously there's a massive difference here between these two people's version of events. Now obviously Donna Jagger's was the common law wife of one of the deceased men, Craig Rolfe. And in her statement, she believed it was 30 kilos of cocaine. And Nichols then claims that it was actually 5 kilos that was going to be flown in. So there's obviously a massive discrepancy here. Not that it really means anything, but it's interesting that there isn't any sort of syncing of, you know, the version of events. If you had two people who weren't really known to each other, who both knew that a deal was going down involving 30 kilos of cocaine, then that's a lot more believable than one person saying it's 5 kilos and another person saying it was 30. The barrister then goes on to talk about the getaway vehicle used for this triple murder. And he then describes something which I have mentioned countless times in my previous videos. And I'll just read this out to you. These are his words. He has actually written here, What we are expected to believe is that two intelligent men plan a professional assassination of copybook proportion, then decide to use a worn-out VW Passat with leaking exhaust system and its torque converter leaking oil, which is why Nichols dumped the vehicle in the first place. As a last resort, they then dupe Nichols into driving them to and from a murder scene, regardless of false plates. Now, to give you a little bit more of my input on this regarding the false plates, this is actually something that was, brought to my attention by one of the viewers of this channel, and he makes an extremely valid point here. We know that Jack Wombs, engineering is his passion. It's something that he's extremely passionate about. It's something that he has a great deal of knowledge in. Now, for one moment, can you imagine if Jack Wombs tries to attach these false plates? It's damp, it's cold, it's wet. These number plates don't stick. Now, can you imagine that someone who takes engineering, obviously sticking number plates onto a car doesn't take much engineering, but just imagine the sort of thought process of an engineer for a moment. He would be wiping down the surface, he would make it dry, he would reattach a bit more double-sided tape. He would get these plates to stick. He's not an idiot. He would get these plates to stick one way or another. Even if he was committing a crime far less than murder, these plates, they would have been stuck on somehow. They would have been attached to this vehicle in some way or another. But Darren Nichols' version of events for the evening of December the 6th is that Jack tries to stick the number plates, it's wet. Darren Nichols then says to him, "They won't stick, silly, it's wet." And he simply discards the number plates in the back of the vehicle. Now, this isn't congruent, and this doesn't tie in with what we know of Jack Wombs the person. He would have just dried the surface down, he would have cleaned the surface, and if he didn't have any more tape, he would have found a way of getting those number plates onto the vehicle. We are led to believe that this person who takes engineering and working on vehicles so seriously, it really is his sort of calling and his passion in life, would just simply discard these plates, even though they're on their way to commit a triple murder. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever, and it is picked up upon here by the barrister in his notes. The barrister then goes on to speak further about this getaway vehicle, where he writes, "Police scientists can find no evidence to place this VW Passat at the scene of the crime, not even an oil spillage. Police scientists confirm gun residue is present on the rear seat of this Passat, although it is inconsistent with spent cartridge residue found at the scene of the crime." So we have heard countless times regarding the VW Passat and what a poor state it was in. There was no verifiable tyre tracks found at the crime scene, the entrance to the lane. There was no oil dropped from the vehicle at the entrance to the lane or where Darren Nichols supposedly parked up to wait for Michael Steele and Jack Wombs to come back. What is interesting is that gunpowder residue is found in the rear of the Passat, but it was not consistent with the spent cartridges found at the scene of the crime. The barrister then goes on to talk about Darren Nichols in some more detail and regarding the vehicles that Darren Nichols owned. He does mention that one of the most striking and obvious factors is whenever a motor vehicle is used for an illegal purpose, Nichols supplies the vehicle. It is owned and hired by Nichols. The VW Scirocco, owned and used for alleged drug run into Holland. The VW Cabaret, owned and used to take drug money into Holland. The Peugeot 406, owned and used for alleged drug run into Holland. The Jaguar XJ6, owned and used to retrieve drugs on the 13th of the 5th, 96. Transit van, owned and used to retrieve drugs on the 13th of the 5th, 96. Land Rover, owned and used to recover drugs on the 13th of the 5th, 96. Citroen, used to recover drugs at Galloway's Corner. Seat, hired and used for alleged drug run to Holland. Ford Mondeo, hired and used for alleged drug run to Holland. And VW Passat, owned and alleged murder vehicle. Now, all of these vehicles were owned or hired by Darren Nichols, and they were used for those purposes that I've just mentioned. There is also a massive argument regarding the VW Passat, the getaway vehicle for these murders, and who actually owned the vehicle at the time these people were killed. Darren Nichols states that he sold it some months before or some weeks before the murders, whereas Michael Steele claims that he never bought this vehicle. Darren Nichols didn't get any paperwork filled out for whoever bought the vehicle, so there is no way to say for sure who the actual owner of this vehicle was when these people were killed. Darren Nichols didn't send any paperwork off to the DVLA to get the owner changed over or anything like that. And he has no documentation to say that this vehicle was actually ever sold. So did Darren Nichols actually own this vehicle that he said he was driving on the night of those murders? It's an interesting point to think about. The barrister then goes on to talk about the phone call from Sarah Saunders as Pat Tate was entering the lane itself. He then mentions the following, which is actually quite interesting. Pre-influence statements by Nichols clearly suggest Saunders' phone call commences as the Range Rover is turning into the lane. The time of the call commencement is 18:44 hours, giving the Range Rover 1 minute to reach the gate after turning into the lane. This means that Tate has at least 2 minutes and 46 seconds of phone call left, which does not fit into the alleged schedule. It also means that Wholmes and Nichols must arrive at least by 18:41, hopefully to be in position, as Wholmes would have to walk from the turnoff into the lane to the area where the gate is situated. Nichols alleges to leave the halfway house at 18:30 hours to travel to Workhouse Lane, which is a 14-mile drive. Allowing for an average speed of 45 miles per hour, it will take Nichols and Wholmes 19 minutes to reach the top of the lane. When the police retraced this journey, it took them 21 minutes. This would indicate an ETA to the top of the lane of 18:48 hours. Nichols and Wholmes arrived too late, 8 minutes too late. If we adapt Nichols' influenced attempt, which is the phone call which ends as they reach the top of the lane, this indicates the Range Rover arrives at exactly 18:48 hours at the top of the lane. Clearly, Wholmes and Nichols have to arrive at least 3 minutes prior to this at a minimum, which means they must arrive at 18:45 hours at the latest. Calculated ETA is 18:49 hours. They are still 4 minutes too late. The barrister then goes on to state, could Nichols be telling an essence of truth? Let's assume he is in the Range Rover and witnesses Saunders' call, which does not end or commence as the Range Rover enters the lane, 18:44 hours to 18:48 hours. Observe closely police photographs at the scene. There are carbon deposits under the exhaust tailpipe of the Range Rover, which would indicate it stood there running for some time. We also have a confidential witness statement from Raymond Alfred Wright on the 13th of the 12th 95, who observes a Range Rover enter the lane between 1850 and 1900 hours, which he claims had rear lamp guards. The deceased vehicle, of course, does not. We also have the witness Kevin Tarbuck, unused witness statement from the 14th of the 12th 95, who at 1940 hours witnesses a white Ford Escort van pull out of the lane in front of him. This witness describes Nichols' account of a near miss, but Nichols puts the VW Passat in the frame, not an Escort van. Police at one stage had Tarbuck as a confidential witness. Raymond Wright's statement 13th for the 12th 95 confidential witness, the Range Rover this man observes entering Workhouse Lane at 18:50 hours on the 6th of the 12th is clearly not the deceased vehicle, as rear lamp guards are a feature of the vehicle he witnesses. What is significant is that 3 men of large stature occupy the vehicle. The one sitting in the rear offside seat is wearing a fawn light-coloured top, not overalls. Certainly some interesting information there, particularly those witness statements. I may have to go back over those again at some point and take a closer look at those, which I'll make a video about in the future. Now, also interesting to note the carbon deposits under the exhaust. This was actually mentioned in the summing up in court as well, that they believed that the vehicle was left there running for some time. What did the vehicle enter the lane and then literally wait there for a little while before they were killed? That's an interesting point to make. But certainly those witness statements regarding the Range Rover or a different Range Rover being seen and also an Escort van pulling out of the turning, they are certainly ones that I should make videos about, especially trying to tie it in with Darren Nichols' version of events when pulling out in front of a vehicle, etc. I think that could make for quite an interesting video series, so I'll definitely do that in the future. And the last point I want to make in this video is something that I did touch upon at the very start of this video, in fact, and that is regarding DC Jim's relationship with Darren Nichols. Now, what we know from the transcripts, from the recorded telephone calls, and from the police investigation against their own officer, DC Jim, is the fact that the relationship with Darren Nichols actually starts at the very latest, January 1996, and this relationship, I believe, could have been going on for a lot longer than that. Now, what I want you to ask yourself is that obviously Darren Nichols comes to the attention of the police in January, and 5 months actually elapse between the time that Darren Nichols comes onto the radar and his actual arrest. Now, why is that? Why did the police sit on this information regarding Darren Nichols being at the crime scene, being tied in with DC Jim, and also being tied in, most importantly, with Michael Steele and Jack Womes, who were placed near the crime scene on the evening of the triple murder? Why did the police know of Darren Nichols, yet sit on this information for 5 months? For all the police knew, Darren Nichols could have been the murderer. Darren Nichols could have been a dangerous person who they allowed to roam free for 5 months. Now, during all of the police investigation, we are led to believe that Michael Steele's name came up within the first 2 or 3 days of the murders taking place. Yet it was quite easy to tie in Darren Nichols alongside Michael Steele. Yet you don't hear of Darren Nichols' name ever being mentioned. Is that because DC Jim's relationship with Darren Nichols was known by other officers, by people actually leading this investigation? Why was Darren Nichols never mentioned as a very much a prime suspect early on in this investigation? It's only really the name of Michael Steele that you hear about. You hear of Ivan Dibley talking about how this crime was committed, how there must have been a fourth occupant in the Range Rover that night, how there must have been a second person who was waiting down the lane with the guns to pass to someone who gets out of the Range Rover, and then the shooting can commence. But if Darren Nichols was making all of these phone calls on December the 6th, if Darren Nichols could be tied to the crime scene around the time of these murders, and if Darren Nichols could also be tied in with this police officer who was known to be corrupt, who was actually being investigated by his own police force, why does Darren Nichols' name never get mentioned? Why is Darren Nichols not under severe surveillance or even arrested until 5 months after these murders? If you would like to learn more about the Range Rover murders as told in court, then please click on the video in front of you now. You'll also see the Essex Boys playlist, which has an array of separate videos regarding this case in one convenient folder. Many thanks for joining me for this video. I look forward to seeing you all again for the next one. Take care. Cheers.